I collapsed at the family dinner table, my throat closing as anaphylactic shock took hold. Through blurring vision, I saw my mother-in-law Vivian's face. Not panicked but coldly satisfied as she watched me gasp for air. "Someone call 911. My husband Adrian shouted, but Vivian made no move toward her phone. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching me die. My hands clawed at my throat as hives erupted across my skin. I'd been so careful, checking every ingredient because everyone knew about my severe shellfish allergy. The pasta dish Vivian had insisted I try contained no visible seafood. But as darkness crept into my vision, I understood. She'd hidden it deliberately, ground into the sauce where I wouldn't detect it until too late. My name is Camila Hart and I'm 28 years old. What Vivian didn't know as she watched me collapse was that I'd suspected her of trying to harm me for weeks. I'd installed hidden cameras throughout our home after finding suspicious powder in my coffee, after inexplicable allergic reactions to foods I'd thought were safe. Every incident had been recorded, time-stamped, and automatically uploaded to a secure cloud account my lawyer had access to. The camera hidden in the dining room chandelier had captured everything. Vivian stirring something into my pasta while I was in the bathroom, her checking to make sure no one was watching, her satisfied smile as she served me the poisoned plate. Adrian finally grabbed his phone and called for help, but those crucial minutes Vivian wasted might cost me my life. Or so she thought. 3 weeks earlier I'd found shrimp paste mixed into my morning yogurt. I have a severe, life-threatening shellfish allergy that everyone in Adrian's family knows about. I carry 2 EpiPens and wear a medical alert bracelet because even trace amounts can kill me. Finding shellfish deliberately added to my food wasn't an accident or cross-contamination. It was attempted murder. I'd thrown the yogurt away and said nothing, but fear gnawed at me. Someone in this house wanted me dead. I started paying closer attention to Vivian, who'd moved in with us 6 months ago after her divorce. She'd never liked me, making constant comments about how I wasn't good enough for her son, how Adrian could have married someone from a better family. But dislike was different from murder. I needed to understand what was happening before making accusations that could destroy my marriage. That evening I found a second incident. Shellfish oil in my salad dressing, carefully mixed so it wasn't immediately visible. I'd caught the smell just before eating and checked the ingredients. Someone had tampered with the bottle. My hands shook as I poured it down the sink. Adrian was at work and Vivian was the only other person home. I called my best friend Zara, a criminal defense attorney, and explained what was happening. "You need to document everything," Zara told me urgently. "Install security cameras, keep samples of the contaminated food if possible, and start recording your interactions with Vivian. If she's really trying to kill you, we need evidence." "Why would my mother-in-law want me dead?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "What does she gain?" Zara's voice was grim. "Control over Adrian, probably. And I'd check your life insurance policy. See who the beneficiaries are and whether Vivian has any financial interest in your death." That thought sent chills through me. I'd updated my life insurance when Adrian and I married 2 years ago. A $2 million policy through my job that named Adrian as primary beneficiary. But if I died, Adrian would inherit everything, including my trust fund from my grandmother's estate. And if Vivian controlled Adrian, she'd effectively control that money. I hired a private security company to install hidden cameras throughout our house. Living room, kitchen, dining room, hallways. The cameras were tiny, concealed in everyday objects, and uploaded footage continuously to secure cloud storage. I also started carrying a small recording device Zara provided, capturing audio of my conversations. For the next 2 weeks I watched and documented. Vivian made multiple attempts to contaminate my food, adding shellfish powder to my coffee grounds, mixing shrimp paste into condiments I regularly used, even putting crab extract in my shampoo hoping I'd have a reaction from skin contact. Each incident was captured on camera. She was careful, checking to make sure Adrian wasn't around, disposing of the shellfish products where they wouldn't be found. But she never suspected I was watching. I collected samples of each contaminated product in sealed bags, labeling them with dates and times, storing them in a locked box at Zara's office. I also started varying my routine, buying food from different stores, eating meals at work more often. The attempts decreased when I wasn't consuming food from our house, which confirmed my suspicion. Adrian noticed my changed behavior. "You're barely eating at home anymore," he commented one evening. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell him, but I needed more evidence first. If I accused his mother of attempted murder without proof, he'd think I was paranoid or trying to drive them apart. Just stress at work, I lied. I've been grabbing food at the office. He accepted that explanation, but Vivian's eyes narrowed. She knew I was avoiding food she could access, and her attempts became more aggressive. I found her in my bathroom one morning holding my medication bottles. Just checking if you need refills, she said with a fake smile. I checked the pills later. Several had been replaced with different medications that would have interacted dangerously with my prescriptions. The camera footage showed her switching them out. This went beyond trying to trigger my allergy. Vivian was attempting multiple methods to harm or kill me, probably hoping one would succeed and look accidental. I scheduled a meeting with Zara to review all the evidence. This is attempted murder, multiple counts, Zara confirmed after watching the camera footage. We have her on video tampering with your food, medications, and personal care products. The question is whether you want to report this to police now or gather more evidence. If we report now, what happens? I asked. Zara considered carefully. Police would investigate, probably arrest her, but a good defense attorney might argue the footage is unclear about intent, that she was just negligent or didn't understand the severity of your allergy. The more attempts we document, the clearer the pattern becomes. It's harder to claim accident when there are 10 documented incidents versus 3. I understood her logic but hated the risk. How much longer should I wait? Get one more clear incident where her intent is undeniable. Something where she's on camera deliberately adding shellfish to your food knowing you'll consume it. Then we go to the police with overwhelming evidence. I agreed, though the thought of waiting for another murder attempt made me sick with fear. I started setting up situations where Vivian would have opportunities, making sure the cameras captured everything. I announced at dinner that I'd be working from home the next day and would love if Vivian could make her famous pasta dish for lunch. I saw the calculation in her eyes. Of course, dear, she said sweetly. I'd be happy to. That night, I reviewed the camera setup with the security company, making sure every angle of the kitchen was covered. The next morning, I pretended to work in my home office while watching the kitchen cameras on my laptop. Vivian started cooking around 11 a.m., preparing what looked like a simple tomato pasta. Then she went to her room and returned with a small jar. The camera zoom captured the label clearly, shellfish paste. She stirred 2 large spoonfuls into my portion of the sauce, mixing it thoroughly so it would be invisible. She tasted Adrian's portion to make sure it was different. She was poisoning only my food. The level of premeditation was chilling. I saved the footage, sent copies to Zara, and prepared myself. When Vivian called me for lunch, I came downstairs with my phone recording audio in my pocket. This smells wonderful, I told Vivian, sitting at the table. Adrian had already left for an afternoon meeting, so it was just the 2 of us. Perfect for her purposes and perfect for mine. Family recipe, Vivian said, watching me intently. Eat up. I lifted my fork, twirled some pasta, and brought it close to my mouth. Then I set it down. Actually, Vivian, I need to ask you something first. Her expression flickered with annoyance. What? Why do you keep trying to kill me? The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? That's insane. The shellfish paste you stirred into my food 30 minutes ago, I said calmly. The same way you've contaminated my yogurt, my coffee, my salad dressing, and my shampoo over the past 3 weeks. The hidden cameras have recorded everything. Vivian's shock transformed into rage. You've been spying on me? In my own home. Adrian's in my home, I corrected. Where you're a guest who's been attempting to murder me. She lunged across the table, grabbing for my plate. You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine. I stepped back calmly, letting her destroy the evidence if she wanted. Actually, I have video footage of 14 separate attempts, samples of contaminated products stored securely with my attorney, and medical documentation of the reactions I've suffered. This plate you just tried to grab? The police are on their way to collect it as evidence. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Vivian's face went white. I opened the door to find 2 police officers and Detective Hannah Price, whom Zara had contacted that morning with our evidence file. Mrs. Vivian Hart? Detective Price addressed my mother-in-law. We have a warrant for your arrest for attempted murder. Vivian screamed that I'd set her up, that I was lying, that she'd never hurt anyone. The officers handcuffed her while reading her rights. Detective Price collected the pasta as evidence, carefully photographing everything before sealing it in evidence bags. "We'll need your full statement," she told me. "And all the camera footage and samples your attorney mentioned." I nodded, feeling simultaneously relieved and shattered. I'd just had my mother-in-law arrested for trying to kill me. My marriage might not survive this. Adrian came home 2 hours later to find police cars in our driveway and his mother being loaded into a squad car. His face went through shock, confusion, and anger in rapid succession. "Camila, what the hell is happening?" I explained everything. The contaminated food, the hidden cameras, the documented evidence of his mother's repeated attempts to trigger my fatal allergy. Adrian shook his head, refusing to believe it. "My mother wouldn't do this. There has to be an explanation." "Maybe she didn't know." "She knew," I interrupted, showing him the camera footage on my laptop. We watched together as Vivian deliberately stirred shellfish paste into my food, checked to make sure she wasn't being observed, and served me the poisoned plate with a smile. Adrian's face crumbled as he watched his mother attempt to murder his wife. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would she do this?" That was the question I couldn't fully answer yet. But I suspected money and control were at the center. Detective Price arrived the next morning to take my formal statement. I walked her through every incident, providing dates, times, and corresponding video footage. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. "Your mother-in-law has been charged with 14 counts of attempted murder," Detective Price explained to Adrian, who sat beside me looking devastated. "She's being held without bail given the severity of the charges and the clear danger she poses to your wife." Adrian's hands shook. "I had no idea. If I'd known, you weren't supposed to know," I told him gently. "She was careful to only attempt this when you weren't around." Over the following days, more details emerged. Police searched Vivian's room and found a notebook detailing her plans, including research about shellfish allergies, lethal doses, and methods to disguise contamination. The notebook also contained financial calculations showing what Adrian would inherit if I died. My life insurance, my trust fund, my share of our home. Vivian had been planning to convince Adrian to support her financially once I was gone, essentially living off my death benefits. The premeditation was clear and chilling. Vivian's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor refused. "Your client attempted to murder someone 14 times over 3 weeks, the prosecutor told Vivian's lawyer. "This wasn't a moment of passion or a single lapse in judgment. This was calculated, systematic, and ongoing. We're going to trial." The trial was scheduled for 4 months out. In the meantime, Adrian and I tried to process what had happened. Our marriage was strained by the trauma and betrayal. "I should have seen it," Adrian kept saying. "I should have noticed she hated you this much." "She hid it well," I replied, though I wasn't sure our relationship would survive. "How do you recover from learning your spouse's mother tried to kill you?" Adrian started therapy to process the trauma and guilt. I did too, dealing with the fear, hypervigilance, and trust issues that came from living with someone actively trying to murder me. Our therapists recommended couples counseling as well, to work through the complex emotions threatening to destroy our marriage. 3 months after Vivian's arrest, her trial began. I was the prosecution's star witness, testifying about discovering the contamination, installing the cameras, and documenting the attempts on my life. The camera footage played in court, showing Vivian systematically poisoning my food while checking to make sure she wouldn't be caught. The jury watched in horror as she stirred shellfish paste into my pasta, her expression cold and calculating. Vivian's defense strategy was to claim she hadn't understood the severity of my allergy, that she'd been trying to help me build tolerance by exposing me to small amounts. It was absurd. The notebook found in her room detailed fatal doses, not therapeutic exposure. The medical expert witness destroyed that defense, explaining that there's no such thing as building tolerance to shellfish allergies through exposure, and that Vivian's amounts would have been lethal. The notebook proved she knew exactly what she was doing. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 14 counts of attempted murder. Vivian showed no remorse, glaring at me from the defense table as if I'd wronged her by surviving. The judge addressed her before sentencing. "You systematically attempted to murder your daughter-in-law over a period of weeks, showing calculation and premeditation. You researched methods to kill her, documented your plans, and executed multiple attempts. Only her vigilance and intelligence prevented you from succeeding. This court has rarely seen such callous disregard for human life. Vivian was sentenced to 45 years in prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. At 62 years old, she'd likely die in prison. As they led her away in handcuffs, Vivian shouted at me, "You stole my son. You deserve what I tried to do." That outburst, captured by court reporters, eliminated any remaining sympathy anyone might have felt for her. She'd confirmed her motive publicly: possessive hatred of the woman her son had married. Adrian broke down in the courthouse hallway after the sentencing. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I brought her into our home. I didn't protect you." I held him, but I also knew our marriage was damaged, possibly beyond repair. Over the next few months, we continued couples therapy, working through the trauma and trying to rebuild trust. It was slow, painful work. Adrian felt crushing guilt for not seeing what his mother was doing. I struggled with resentment that he'd defended her initially, that he'd been blind to her hatred of me. Our therapist helped us understand that we were both victims of Vivian's manipulation and violence. Adrian had lost his mother to her own evil choices. I'd lost my sense of safety in my own home. We had to grieve those losses before we could rebuild. 6 months after the trial, Adrian and I went away for a weekend, trying to reconnect away from the house where everything had happened. We talked honestly about whether our marriage could survive. "I love you," Adrian said, "but I understand if you can't forgive me for bringing her into our lives." I thought carefully before responding. "I love you too. And I don't blame you for your mother's choices. But I need time to heal." We decided to commit to another 6 months of intensive therapy, to really try to repair what Vivian had broken. If we couldn't rebuild trust and intimacy by then, we'd separate amicably. It was a fair compromise that gave us both hope and an exit if needed. The media had covered the trial extensively, and I received dozens of messages from people who'd experienced similar situations. Family members who posed threats, people dismissed when they reported concerns, victims who hadn't survived. Several advocacy organizations contacted me about speaking publicly about family violence and the importance of documenting abuse. I wasn't ready immediately, but I kept their information for when I was healed enough to help others. A year after Vivian's arrest, Adrian and I celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary. We'd made it through the intensive therapy, rebuilt trust slowly and deliberately, and emerged with a stronger marriage than before. The trauma had either destroyed us or forged us into something more resilient. We'd chosen resilience. "I never want to go through anything like that again," Adrian said during our anniversary dinner. "But I'm grateful we survived it together." I agreed. Vivian had tried to kill me to take control of Adrian and my money. Instead, she'd lost everything: her freedom, her son's love, her future, while Adrian and I had emerged closer and more committed than ever. That felt like justice. 18 months after the trial, I was invited to speak at a conference on domestic violence and family threats. The audience included lawyers, law enforcement, victim advocates, and medical professionals. I shared my story of discovering the poisoning attempts, installing cameras to gather evidence, and working with law enforcement to build a case that resulted in conviction. Many people told me I should have confronted Vivian immediately or reported my suspicions before gathering evidence, I explained. But I knew that without proof, it would be my word against hers. My husband might not have believed me. Police might have dismissed it as a family dispute. Gathering documented evidence saved my life and ensured justice was served. The questions during the Q&A were thoughtful and engaged. One woman asked how I'd known to install cameras rather than just confront Vivian. "My best friend is a criminal defense attorney," I explained. "She advised me to document everything before making accusations. That legal advice was invaluable. If you suspect someone is trying to harm you, talk to an attorney who specializes in this area before taking action." Another attendee asked about my relationship with Adrian after discovering his mother had tried to kill me. "It was incredibly difficult," I admitted. "We nearly divorced. But therapy helped us understand we were both victims of his mother's violence. She manipulated him just as much as she tried to kill me. Rebuilding trust took time, patience, and commitment from both of us." 2 years after Vivian's imprisonment, I received a letter from her. I debated reading it, ultimately deciding I needed closure. The letter was bitter and unrepentant. Vivian blamed me for seducing her son away from his family, for tricking her into moving in with us so I could frame her, for ruining her life with my lies and manipulation. She still claimed she'd never intended to hurt me, despite the overwhelming evidence and her own notebook detailing murder plans. I read the letter once and threw it away. Vivian was never going to accept responsibility or show genuine remorse. She'd constructed a narrative where she was the victim, and no amount of evidence would change that delusion. I didn't respond to the letter or engage with her attempts at manipulation. Adrian was relieved when I told him I wouldn't be corresponding with his mother. She's still trying to control the narrative, he observed. Even from prison, she can't accept that her choices had consequences. We'd moved to a new house 6 months after the trial, wanting a fresh start in a place that didn't carry memories of attempted murder. The new home felt safe and ours, unmarked by Vivian's presence. 3 years after the poisoning attempt, I published an article about my experience in a victim advocacy magazine. The article combined my personal story with practical advice for people facing similar threats. How to document evidence when to involve law enforcement, the importance of legal counsel, and strategies for staying safe while gathering proof. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out sharing their own stories of family violence, many thanking me for providing a roadmap they wished they'd had. Several readers asked me to expand the article into a book. I contacted a literary agent who was enthusiastic about the project. "Stories like yours need to be told," she said. "Not just as a cautionary tale, but as a practical guide for people facing threats from people they should be able to trust." I spent 6 months writing Trust But Verify: How I Survived My Mother-in-Law's Murder Plot. The book combined my personal narrative with interviews from experts in law enforcement, domestic violence advocacy, and criminal psychology. It also included a comprehensive guide to documenting abuse and working with authorities to ensure justice. The book published 18 months later and became a surprising bestseller. It resonated with people who'd faced betrayal from family members, who'd been dismissed when reporting concerns, or who'd survived violence from unexpected sources. The media attention brought both support and criticism. Some people accused me of exploiting my trauma for profit, claiming I should have handled everything privately. Others praised my courage in speaking publicly about family violence. I focused on the positive feedback, the messages from people who said my book had helped them escape dangerous situations or gather evidence that led to justice. 4 years after Vivian's arrest, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering new laws about family violence and coercive control. My testimony focused on how traditional domestic violence frameworks didn't always capture violence between in-laws or extended family members. The law assumes violence happens between romantic partners or parents and children, I explained. But family violence can come from any relative with access to your home and life. We need broader legal frameworks that recognize these threats. The committee was receptive, and several members referenced my testimony in their subsequent advocacy for expanded protection orders and enhanced penalties for family violence regardless of the specific relationship. The legislation passed 8 months later, creating new legal protections for victims of violence by extended family members. 5 years after the poisoning attempt, Adrian and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Isabel. Her birth brought unexpected healing. This new life represented our future, unmarked by Vivian's violence. "I was worried about having children after everything with my mother," Adrian admitted while holding newborn Isabel. "I was afraid of passing on some genetic predisposition toward violence or manipulation." Our therapist had addressed these fears extensively. "Your mother's behavior was her choice," I reminded him. "Nothing about her violence is predetermined in Isabel. We get to raise her with love, boundaries, and accountability." Adrian nodded, tears in his eyes. "She'll never know her paternal grandmother. I don't know how to explain that when she's older. We'll tell her age-appropriate truth," I said. "That her grandmother made very bad choices that hurt people, and that sometimes we have to distance ourselves from family members who are dangerous." Isabel's arrival also forced a decision about Vivian. She'd written multiple letters requesting photos and updates about her granddaughter. Adrian and I discussed it with our therapist and agreed. No contact. Vivian had attempted to murder me. She'd shown no remorse. She didn't get access to our child. We drafted a formal no-contact order and filed it with the prison, ensuring Vivian couldn't send more letters or attempt communication through third parties. 6 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice and victim rights. The keynote address focused on my experience and the broader lessons about believing victims, the importance of documentation, and the need for legal systems to take family violence seriously regardless of the relationship dynamics. The speech was well received, and afterward, several attendees approached me with their own stories. One woman described how her sister-in-law had been systematically poisoning her husband. Another man talked about his father attempting to harm his spouse. Each story reinforced how common and how hidden these family threats could be. I provided resources and contacts to everyone who approached me, hoping to help them find safety and justice. Adrian had been reluctant about my public advocacy initially, worried it would keep us trapped in the trauma. But he'd come to understand that helping others was part of my healing process. "You're turning something terrible into something that helps people," he observed. "That's powerful." 7 years after Vivian's arrest, her attorney contacted us about a potential parole hearing. Despite her 45-year sentence, she was eligible for review after 7 years due to overcrowding and good behavior credits. Adrian and I were both horrified. "She tried to kill you 14 times, Adrian said angrily. "Good behavior in prison doesn't change that." We contacted the prosecutor who'd handled the original trial, now a district attorney. She assured us she'd oppose parole vigorously and that we'd have opportunities to provide victim impact statements. The parole hearing was scheduled for 2 months out. I prepared a detailed statement documenting the ongoing impact of Vivian's attempted murder, the PTSD, the hypervigilance around food, the medical expenses for therapy, the damage to my relationship with Adrian's extended family who'd split over the case. I also emphasized Vivian's complete lack of remorse, highlighted by her bitter letters attempting to blame me for her crimes. Adrian prepared his own statement as the son of the perpetrator, describing how her actions had destroyed their relationship and traumatized him. The hearing itself was brief. Vivian had prepared a statement claiming she'd been depressed and hadn't understood what she was doing, that she'd found religion in prison and was reformed. It was manipulative nonsense that ignored the documented premeditation. I read my victim impact statement, describing in detail how discovering your mother-in-law is trying to kill you destroys your sense of safety in your own home. Vivian didn't act once in a moment of anger, I told the parole board. She planned, researched, and executed 14 separate murder attempts over 3 weeks. She documented her plans in a notebook. She calculated how much money my death would bring her. This wasn't mental illness or depression. It was greed and hatred. The parole board deliberated for 30 minutes before denying parole. Vivian wouldn't be eligible for another review for 5 years. Justice had been served again, but the hearing reopened emotional wounds we'd been carefully healing. Adrian struggled with renewed guilt and grief over his mother's choices. 8 years after the poisoning attempt, Adrian and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. We'd survived something that destroyed most marriages: violence from a family member, betrayal of trust, and the complicated aftermath of criminal prosecution. 10 years, Adrian marveled during our anniversary dinner. "We've been through hell together. And came out stronger," I added. We'd both grown tremendously through the trauma and recovery. Adrian had worked through the guilt and established healthy boundaries with his extended family members who'd supported Vivian. I'd transformed from a victim into an advocate, helping dozens of people navigate similar situations. Our daughter Isabel was now 3 years old, bright and curious. We'd begun having age-appropriate conversations about family, safety, and the fact that sometimes people were related to make bad choices. "Not everyone whose family is safe," I explained when she asked why she didn't have a grandmother on Daddy's side. "And it's okay to stay away from people who hurt us, even if they're related to us." These conversations were important. I wanted Isabel to grow up understanding that family ties didn't excuse abuse, that she had the right to set boundaries regardless of relationship. 9 years after Vivian's arrest, her case became a teaching example in law schools and criminal justice programs. Several professors contacted me requesting permission to use my case in their curricula. I agreed, hoping future lawyers and law enforcement would be better prepared to handle family violence cases. One professor invited me to guest lecture at her law school about the importance of victim-centered approaches to prosecution. The students were engaged and asked thoughtful questions about how I'd gathered evidence, why I'd chosen to press charges rather than just distance myself from Vivian, and how the legal system could better protect victims of family violence. The hardest part was continuing to live with someone I knew was trying to kill me, I told the class. I had to act normal, had to hide my fear, had to maintain the surveillance without tipping her off. That took enormous psychological strength and support from my attorney and therapist. One student asked if I ever regretted pressing charges rather than just cutting contact with Vivian. Never, I replied firmly. If I'd just left or cut contact, Vivian would have been free to potentially harm someone else. She needed to face consequences for her actions, both for justice and for public safety. 10 years after the poisoning attempt, I published a second book focused specifically on helping people recognize and document family violence. Silent Threats: Recognizing and Surviving Violence from Family Members, combined research on family dynamics, criminal psychology and practical strategies for staying safe. The book included interviews with other survivors of violence from in-laws, siblings, parents, and adult children. Each story reinforced that family violence was more common than people acknowledged and that the relationship made it harder, not easier, to escape. Adrian had become an advocate himself, speaking at men's groups about breaking cycles of family dysfunction and the importance of believing partners when they report concerns. My biggest regret is that I didn't see what my mother was doing earlier, he told one group. I dismissed small warning signs because she was my mother. I couldn't imagine she'd hurt someone I loved. Isabel was now 8 years old, and we'd had more detailed conversations about Vivian as she matured enough to understand complex topics. Your grandmother made very bad choices, Adrian explained during one conversation. She tried to hurt Mom because she was angry and wanted to control our family. The police arrested her and she went to prison to keep people safe. Isabel processed this information thoughtfully. Is she ever coming back? No, I told her honestly. She'll be in prison for the rest of her life because what she did was so serious. These conversations were difficult but necessary. We didn't want Isabel learning about her grandmother's crimes from an internet search or from a classmate who'd found news articles. Better she heard the truth from us in an age-appropriate way. 11 years after the trial, I received an unexpected call from the prison. Vivian had terminal cancer and was requesting a compassionate release to die outside prison walls. The request required victim notification, which was why they'd contacted me. Adrian and I discussed the request with our therapist. How do you feel about her potentially being released? Our therapist asked. Angry, I admitted. She tried to kill me 14 times and showed no remorse. The fact that she's dying now doesn't change what she did or make her less dangerous. Adrian agreed. If she's released, where would she even go? Not to us, obviously. But I don't want her contacting us or Isabel either. We drafted statements opposing compassionate release, arguing that Vivian remained dangerous and unrepentant and that her terminal diagnosis didn't erase her crimes. The prison board reviewed the request and our opposition. They denied compassionate release, ruling that Vivian's crimes were too severe and that she'd shown no genuine remorse that would justify early release even on medical grounds. Vivian died in prison 3 months later. Adrian received notification from the prison chaplain. He sat with the news quietly, processing complicated emotions, grief for losing his mother, relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else, anger at the choices that had brought them to this point. I wish things had been different, he said finally. I wish she'd been the mother I thought she was. I know, I told him, holding his hand. You deserved a better mother. Isabel deserved a grandmother who loved her. But we can only work with who people actually are, not who we wish they were. We didn't attend Vivian's funeral. Adrian's sister handled the arrangements, and we sent flowers but maintained our distance. It was the boundary we needed to protect our healing and our family. Vivian's death closed a chapter we'd been living with for over a decade. 12 years after the poisoning attempt, I reflected on how much had changed. I'd gone from being a terrified woman documenting her mother-in-law's murder attempts to a nationally recognized advocate for victims of family violence. I'd published 2 books, spoken at dozens of conferences, and helped create legislation that protected others facing similar threats. Adrian and I had weathered trauma that destroyed most marriages and emerged with a relationship deeper and more authentic than before. Isabel was growing into a thoughtful, compassionate young girl who understood that family meant love and respect, not just biology. The trauma hadn't disappeared. I still had moments of hypervigilance around food, still checked ingredients obsessively, still carried 2 EpiPens everywhere despite no longer having anyone actively trying to poison me. But I'd learned to manage the PTSD symptoms and built a life that felt safe and meaningful. I occasionally received letters from people who'd read my books or heard my speeches, thanking me for giving them courage to escape dangerous family members or to report violence they'd been suffering in silence. Those messages reminded me why sharing my story mattered. 13 years after Vivian's arrest, a true crime podcast requested permission to feature my case. I initially declined, uncomfortable with the entertainment aspect of true crime. But the producer explained their approach focused on victim agency and practical lessons rather than sensationalism. After reviewing sample episodes and their editorial standards, I agreed to participate. The resulting 3-part series, The Mother-in-Law Who Tried to Kill Me, was thoughtfully produced, centering my experience and the legal strategies that led to justice rather than glorifying Vivian's crimes. The podcast reached an enormous audience and I received hundreds of messages from listeners. Many shared their own stories of family threats. Others thanked me for demonstrating that it's possible to survive and thrive after such betrayal. Several mentioned they'd started documenting concerning behavior from family members after hearing my story. That felt like the impact I'd hoped for, practical help for people facing danger. 14 years after the poisoning attempt, Adrian and I welcomed our second child, a son we named Marcus after Adrian's father, who'd been supportive throughout the ordeal and had cut contact with Vivian after learning what she'd done. Baby Marcus's arrival felt like another step forward, another symbol of the family we'd built despite Vivian's attempts to destroy us. "We've created something good from something terrible," Adrian observed while holding our newborn son. "That's powerful." Isabel was thrilled to be a big sister and immediately protective of baby Marcus. Watching her gentle care reminded me why we'd fought so hard to heal our marriage and build a stable family. These children deserved a home filled with love and safety, not fear and dysfunction. 15 years after Vivian had drugged my food trying to trigger my fatal allergy, I sat at a family dinner with Adrian, Isabel, Marcus, and several close friends who'd become chosen family. The table was filled with food I'd prepared myself, ingredients I'd checked personally, meals that represented safety and love rather than threat. "Mom, tell the story about how you met Dad again," Isabel requested. She loved hearing about our early relationship before everything got complicated. I shared the story of meeting Adrian at a mutual friend's wedding, our first date at an Italian restaurant, the moment we both create a storyline outline, chapter-by-chapter breakdown, for a new story with a different title. 9:28 a.m. knew this relationship was special. It was a happy story unmarred by what came later. After dinner, as we cleaned up together, Adrian pulled me aside. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he said quietly. "After everything my mother did, you had every right to walk away. You chose to stay and fight for our marriage instead." "You were worth fighting for," I replied. "And I wanted to prove that Vivian didn't get to win, didn't get to destroy what we'd built together." Looking back over 15 years, I could see clearly how my mother-in-law's attempt to murder me had paradoxically made me stronger. The fear and trauma had forced me to develop courage I hadn't known I possessed. Documenting the evidence had taught me the importance of preparation and strategy. Surviving the aftermath had shown me resilience I could apply to any challenge. And transforming my experience into advocacy had given my pain purpose. Vivian had drugged my food to trigger my allergy, expecting I'd die at that family dinner table while she watched with cold satisfaction. Instead, I'd survived because of the cameras I'd secretly installed, the evidence I'd meticulously gathered, and the legal protections I'd put in place before her final murder attempt. The hospital report that came back after that dinner had confirmed deadly levels of shellfish allergen in my bloodstream, levels that should have killed me. I'd survived only because Adrian had finally called 911 despite Vivian's attempts to delay, and because the EpiPen I'd immediately administered had bought me time until paramedics arrived. That hospital report became the final, irrefutable piece of evidence that Vivian had tried to commit murder, not just cause a minor allergic reaction as her defense later claimed. 15 years later, I was alive, thriving, and using my experience to help others survive similar betrayals. Vivian was gone, her schemes destroyed, her freedom lost, her relationship with her son permanently severed by her own evil choices. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. It's about refusing to let someone's violence define or destroy you. It's about turning survival into strength and using your story to protect others. That's exactly what I'd done, and I'd make the same choices again without hesitation. My mother-in-law had tried to kill me. Instead, she'd inadvertently created an advocate who would spend the rest of her life ensuring other victims survived and their abusers faced consequences. That felt like the truest, most satisfying revenge of all.